Okay, welcome to the very first student interview podcast of the Epic Higher Ed podcast. If you're new to this podcast, which you probably are because this is only the second episode and the first actual student interview episode, the show is all about talking with students to get their perspectives and their stories surrounding higher ed. And in this episode, I talk with Adrienne, who was one of my previous students, and in it we have a great conversation surrounding race and skin color and how that has impacted her experience as a student. And she helps enlighten me to a number of different resources and shares great stories about what her educational experience has been like as a Black student. And in this, you're going to hear me flub a lot, and a big part of this podcast is an opportunity for me to learn and grow as an educator. And I just appreciate Adrienne being so understanding and knowing that that is my mindset and that is my heart as we are going into this. I definitely flub around, and I hope that me flubbing around helps normalize the fact that you will probably flub around, right? As a heterosexual white male, there's a lot of privilege, and I cannot understand the experience of Black students, and I am guilty of microaggressions and guilty of being ignorant, and I hope to learn and grow, and conversations like this have helped. And so I just am so thankful Adrienne was willing to have an open mind and open heart and be so very forgiving and understanding for when I stumble around and am awkward and am trying to figure out how to better have these conversations. So hopefully this is a learning experience for you, but let's go ahead and get into this conversation with Adrienne. All right, Adrienne, welcome to the first Epic Higher Ed podcast. And this podcast is all about sharing student stories and having conversations with students so that educators can get a better sense of who their students are and improve compassion and empathy and ultimately teaching and learning. And maybe we can even normalize some experiences for students as well. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I am great. So Adrienne was a student of mine, and I really appreciate that she was here to be my first interview. And Adrienne was in biomechanics with me at CSU Chico, but that's as much of an intro that I want to give you. So I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Okay. Well, this is I came to Chico in spring 2019. And my usual day on campus is usually I have morning classes, and then since I'm part of the athletic program on campus as well, I usually try to keep my afternoons free. And what else? During my free time on campus, I usually spend it on the CCLC, which is the Cross-Cultural Learning Center on campus. And then I'm also part of the executive board for the BSU, which is the Black Student Union on campus. So if we're usually having tablings or meetings or events, I spend my time just on campus, just having conversations. And then that's pretty much it, since my social life is my school life.
Fair enough. So if you are listening and not on the video, Adrienne, how would you describe yourself to our listeners?
In what way? Sorry.
So, right, those of you who are here, and I'm dodging around this probably because I'm still new to these conversations as well, but you are a Black student.
Correct.
Right? And so we're hoping to get a little bit of insight into how the color of your skin has played into your educational experience. Mm-hmm. But I just want to make that clear for the users, or the listeners, that might not have derived that from saying that you were on the board of
the Black Student Union, yeah.
Black Student Union. That's what I thought. So just kind of what does your average day look like as a student? Obviously, we're in COVID now, which makes things look a little different, but maybe give us a before COVID and an after COVID.
Okay, yeah. So before COVID, I was pretty active on campus since I was part of the athletic program, since I'm on the track team, and I'm also part of some of the clubs on campus as well. So I spend most of my day, usually from like 11 to like sunset sometimes, if the day's busy, on campus, kind of just talking to students, the teachers, or just kind of hanging out, eating, and stuff like that. But since COVID had happened, everything's basically online. But I am going to be on campus as an RA, so I'm going to be living on campus. Don't really know how that's going to look since they haven't
This coming fall?
Yeah, this coming fall, since there's going to be like COVID regulations and everything. But I am going to spend most of my time on campus as well next semester. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you who aren't sure of what Chico State's doing, they are doing a hybrid model where some of the important classes are going to be on campus with like a high flex or a hybrid type of format. And so we are still trying to figure out a lot of the regulations on what that's going to look like. Did you know I was actually an RA?
You were?
Back in the heyday? Yeah, here at Chico State. I was a grad student
Oh,
RA,
really?
so I was like the old guy.
I'm kind of excited about it though, since this is my first time.
It was a really great experience.
That's what I've heard.
I really liked it. I'm excited that you're doing that. So what did things look like after you switched to COVID or like remote learning?
It was pretty interesting. I had like a wide variation of what teachers were doing. So some teachers were really proactive and still having set schedules for class period times and for us to have like group sessions and stuff like that. And other teachers were kind of just more of a less proactive. So it was more not like proactive, like they weren't cooperating, but more of like a regular online class. So you were having set due dates by the end of the week, and if you needed the time with the instructor, they were giving it to you for like set periods of like office hours and stuff like that. So it was very like a mixed field of like different interactions.
Yeah, we had to take the entire campus online, and a lot of instructors were more ready for that than others. As a student, which of those formats worked best for you?
Definitely the ones where the set schedules for the class where if you needed the help, the teachers were there for you, and they had everything kind of day to day, and the end of the week we had everything due and stuff like that. And more of like the on hands learning, even though we were online, something closer to the remote, like in campus classrooms.
Yeah. I know a lot of instructors right now are wondering, how do I make my learning hands-on? What were some of the things that instructors did that made you feel like you were getting more of a hands-on experience while learning remotely?
I think my most like positive one for classes was yours, because you did you had videos for us to watch for lectures. Since your class, it was already kind of set up for it to be a remote learning thing. So we had the lectures that we watched ahead of time. And then we had the challenges and assignments that we're doing. We also had office hours that we could go to for points and stuff like that. So I think having the conversations with teachers and the students at the same time, because it was more of a group learning kind of situation, it made the whole class a lot easier. And since you took into account, since we weren't in class, so you're a little bit more lenient with like our questions and stuff like that, it was actually a lot more helpful as well too.
I'm glad to hear that you liked my format. That's something I definitely strive for. What made a class hard for you during COVID?
When I think the only communication we had was email. I had some classes where our only form of communication was email, and they would only check it like once a week. And that kind of made it a little bit more difficult to have those conversations, because like if you emailed them after a certain time, they weren't going to answer your email till the following week. So like even stuff was due and stuff like that, you still wouldn't get your answers. So that was probably the hardest one.
Right. Yeah, that makes it tough. So during the COVID, I know just from working with you that you were also helping with your niece, right?
Yeah.
How was that, keeping up with studies and also kind of helping out with little ones?
Well, usually I did my school stuff when she was sleeping, so like during her afternoon nap or in the mornings before she would wake up or like after she would go to bed. But it was actually kind of a nice thing because it kept my days like separate instead of like everything kind of just flowing as one continuous day. I kind of still had like a set schedule, so it was like my schedule kind of revolved around her schedule, which was, I mean, it doesn't sound like it would be a good thing, but it was kind of nice to have some sort of structure to it.
Yeah, a bit of separation.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. That makes sense. Makes sense. So obviously a lot is going on in the world right now with advocating for the Black Lives Matter movement with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. How has that impacted you as a student and as a person of color, specifically a Black person of color?
It's kind of started a lot more conversations like outside of my own community. I'm used to having these conversations with students that look more like me in like ethnicity and racial background. And since like the whole Black Lives Matter movement is kind of being more amplified now due to like the unforeseen circumstances and stuff like that, more people of different racial backgrounds are reaching out to me and having these conversations, which I think is like probably the most important aspect of the whole thing happening too.
Yeah. What does it look like for you when someone reaches out in a good way versus a bad way? Like, if an instructor even or a peer was like, hey, I don't really know what to be saying or doing right now, or how can they start up that conversation with you?
I think probably like the best way to start these conversations is to show personal experiences because it's easier to have these types of conversations with people when you can put a face to the situation. So like without like a face, people kind of are more inherent to saying like the like words that they wouldn't necessarily use to people that they know. But if you put like a familiar face to it, they're probably going to have show more sympathy and compassion to the whole situation and be more open to actually listening instead of responding with hatefulness.
Yeah, that makes sense. How do you feel it's going to impact your upcoming school year and that experience? Are you expecting conversations to be more likely between you and instructors or between you and peers or on campus? What are you kind of thinking about this upcoming semester with things really in the spotlight?
Well, I'm hoping that it'll be able to kind of start a bridge between multiple communities on campus because I've noticed that there are a lot of clubs and different communities on campus, whether you're African American or Hispanic or Asian American or white and stuff like that. And I think being able to have these conversations through the different clubs, whether you're of the same politic background or familiar background, and kind of just showing compassion and stuff like that between different like experiences would probably be the best way to start it because I'm hoping like the conversation won't end basically.
Yeah. It seems like in America we have this, I'm sure there's a term for it, but this tendency to like, hey, we got bored with COVID, so let's pretend it doesn't exist, right? As kind of an exact example. And I mean, even my own social media news feeds have been slowing down in terms of the racial injustices that are going on, and they're still popping up. I'm seeing videos and examples of these things that are still going on. And you know that they're current. I watched a video actually just this morning that came across my feed of a black man who was dancing in front of his house. And a lady called the police on him, thinking he was mentally unhinged, and it got inappropriate. And all the police were wearing masks. So you know it's current, you know it's like happening right now. And yet that's still not getting as much attention as if that video had popped up 2 weeks ago. What can we do to keep the conversation going?
I think it's a big thing with, you have to start being able to be being comfortable in uncomfortable situations and having the conversations with people that aren't of the same opinions and backgrounds as yourself. Because usually when you have these types of conversations with people who think just like you, act like just you, and look just like you guys are going to end the conversation and come to the same conclusion that you started it with. But if you have two people of two different backgrounds or two different opinions, and they're having those uncomfortable situations or uncomfortable conversations with each other, it kind of causes more room to grow in certain situations.
Yeah, there's this term that I came across recently that it's conscious incompetence.
Oh, yeah.
And it doesn't feel good, right? It doesn't feel good to recognize that you're incompetent in some ways, to put it bluntly, right?
Yeah.
And I can imagine, I mean, even just from my own experience, like recognizing that my lived experience is not the same as other people can sometimes feel odd, right? Or I'm thankful that I can recognize my privilege as a heterosexual white male, middle class, right? There's a lot of privilege there. But even kind of recognizing that there's a lot of privilege, especially with a sensitive heart, it like almost hurt. It doesn't almost, it hurts to know that my lived experience isn't the same as others, because it kind of breaks my heart for others. And I know I shouldn't feel like necessarily pity, but it helps me to know that I need to learn and recognize and understand how they are approaching it. What could your instructors do to, I want to, like, I'm not sure how to word it, but support you and support other students of color, but that seems kind of like cliche. But even just, what can they do to recognize that your lived experience is likely very different than theirs, and how can they support that in the classroom?
I guess it's like something that I had heard you say before, and it's more of like you have to kind of have mutual respect for each other's time and each other's life, because the experiences that students have and teachers have, probably they do have similarities, but there are differences, and sometimes on both sides we don't see each other's differences in each other's lives. So I think I'm probably like very biased, or not biased, but I've learned to not show too many biases in favoring the student side, since I have seen the struggles of the teacher side as well. And being able to understand that both of us have like a life outside of classroom, and understanding that we all juggle different familiar problems or work or finances or anything that may interfere with our educational life, and having that mutual understanding that both the students and the teachers do have to deal with other things outside of their life, and taking the time to actually figure it out as well, not just saying that we do know that you have something going on, but understanding how can we help with those different situations would probably be like the best way to help with relations and stuff like that.
Yeah, so it sounds like a lot of it is recognizing it, that it exists is the first step, but then talking and discussing and collaborating on how to move forward with that situation or circumstances.
Yeah.
As you know, since you've had class with me, I'm pretty darn transparent in what goes on in my life. And personally, I think that's important, because what goes on in my life impacts who I am in the classroom, even if it's just I'm tired that day and might not be bringing the same energy, or if something really exciting just happened or really hard just happened. What do you feel about instructors like being vulnerable like that or sharing, because a lot of people have this idea that when you're in this position of like power or leadership that you kind of need to have a wall between anything that isn't relevant to that. And I'd argue that who I am outside of the classroom absolutely is part and relevant to me in the classroom, but a lot of people feel there needs to be a wall there. Do you like it when instructors kind of break down that wall and are transparent with what's going on, or do you prefer them to kind of stop talking about their kids, right? I've heard that they're like, he talks about his kids too much.
No, I'd definitely rather have my teachers be transparent. I think it's more of like a relatability thing. And like if a teacher is like willing to share their outside life with me, I'm probably going to be more willing to share my outside life with them, just because they're showing that they're a person as well, instead of just being like a robot and like, I'm only here to teach you this, this, and that, and that's basically like all I'm here for.
Yeah, absolutely. I've known some robotic instructors before and had some myself. So it kind of sounds like there's, in a way, commonality that can be found even in just recognizing that you both have struggles, right? You recognize they have struggles that are different from yours, and they recognize that you have struggles different from theirs, and that could be kind of the first step for some commonality and common ground.
Oh, definitely.
So what is, kind of talking about as we move into like who you are beyond the classroom, what is like one thing that you would want your instructors to know about you? Like if you had to choose one thing that you could say, not like a fun fact about Adrienne that she's got a big teddy bear in her room, like you and you, like who you are, what do you wish your instructors knew about you?
I guess, I guess knowing like people's activity on campus as well, like knowing like what you're involved with and who you're involved with, whether it's an outside work life or a club, or understanding if there are mental issues in classrooms and stuff like that. I think knowing like my involvement on the campus would probably be like the most beneficial thing, because then it could start involving like having students and teachers kind of interacting with each other outside of the classroom. Because the times that I have told teachers about my involvement all around the campus, they've kind of showed like intrigue and wanting to actually be involved in it. And I think if I was more proactive with sharing like my life outside of the classroom, the wall that you were talking about would probably be like the best way to start breaking it down.
Yeah. What makes you feel comfortable in sharing that versus uncomfortable sharing that with your instructors?
I think the time that I spend with them, so like if I'm more likely to go to their office hours, or if I'm more likely to spend time after class speaking about assignments or even like things going on in my life, I'm probably more likely to talk about things that I'm also involved on campus as well, just because there's a relationship that we have built, and also just like a mutual respect between each other, that it's more likely that I'm going to be more friendly and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you tell me about a time where your skin color has actually had an impact or created like some sort of experience within a class, that positive or negative?
Yeah. So I've always basically grown up to be like the only one Black student in the classroom. So it's been something that I've come familiar with. But when I started going to school in Santa Ana College, I kind of was shocked by how many students of color that were on campus. So I kind of got used to not being the only one Black person or the only one Black student of color in the classroom. But then I came back to Chico, and it was kind of back, like digressing back to what I'd seen in like elementary school, high school, middle school, that I was like the only one student of color in the class. And I had registered for a class that I found really interesting called Philosophy of Race, because the topic was basically comparing and contrasting the different experiences from a person of color to a non-person of color in America. And for some reason, I thought the class would primarily be students of color just because of the class description. But when I walked in on the first day, I was basically the only Black student of color in the classroom. And I mean, I shouldn't have been shocked, but I was shocked. And it was kind of like each time that there was a conversation happening in the classroom, it felt like everybody was waiting for my response. And since I was the only one Black student in the class and what we were talking about was the Black experience in America, and it seemed like sometimes the students would like roll their eyes at like what I was saying, or they would be taking offense, and as soon as I said something, their immediate response was to reject what I had said. Not like in a like a straightforward type of reject, but it would kind of be like a, how would you say it, like a backhanded type of way. They'd be like, well, I haven't experienced this, or because I haven't actually seen it in my own life and stuff like that, that it can't possibly be true, or just because I see this doesn't mean that I'm this. But I think a lot of people take everything that I said in a personal way, and they felt as if I was attacking them, but I was only actually talking about my own personal experiences or things that people have told me in their own lives. And I think it just because people were taking everything so personal and so offensive that they weren't really taking grasp to what I was trying to say. Yeah.
Why do you think they were taking it so like personally offensive? Like, what do you think about what you were saying really kind of triggered that defensive response from them?
I think it was kind of just like it was like well, not like always accountability, but like if it's something that you perceive that you've done it in your own personal life, or you've seen people that are close to you done certain things in your life and you don't want to see them in a certain way, they kind of take everything super personal and kind of like nullify the experience that other people have gone through.
It can be hard to face that sometimes, right?
Yeah.
That kind of recognition of I darn fucked up, right?
Yeah.
Like, to kind of put it lightheartedly. What can you tell me more about like that feeling of walking into this class where you thought you'd be surrounded by other students of color and recognizing, one, that you were one of the only students of color, specifically Black students, and two, what it kind of felt like that they'd all look to you to explain like this concept or your opinion of this concept. What was that like for you?
I mean, sometimes it was kind of interesting just because I saw people in the class actually agreeing to what I was saying, or not even just agreeing, but like taking into fact what I was saying, and kind of like I could see them like thinking in their own head, like, have I done this before? Or has somebody that I know have done this before? But then at the same time, it could also be like a very uncomfortable and like a stressful situation, because it seemed like I was arguing when I wasn't really arguing. I was like kind of trying to listen to what people were saying, and then I would respond to it, but they would take it as me arguing. And I mean, it's kind of like a normal thing, just because like I've always had these conversations, because it's like the conversations are my life. But for other people, it's like the conversations are more of like a debate, so they don't take it as if they're negating the fact that certain people go through different struggles, or that the intersectionalities in people's lives, such as their race, their gender, their background, their economic standpoint, and stuff like that, take into consideration to different prejudices that people face, because everybody kind of faces prejudices, but your prejudice aren't based on what other people have gone through in their lives and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So you said that you've been having these conversations for your whole life. And I mean, I know, at least in mine, there's a piece of my privilege. I haven't had to have conversations about my race and skin color. And now, as someone who recognizes my privilege and that my skin color has definitely impacted my route in a way that potentially made it easier, or right, kind of that privilege that comes along with it, these conversations definitely like feel very vulnerable to say, hey, skin color can definitely affect trajectories, and maybe even a little bit of guilt that like, hey, I had that edge of up, and God, that sounds disgusting to say, but it's kind of like that. What is it like that you said you're comfortable having these conversations? Mm-hmm. And I just want to know a little bit more about that and how that kind of plays into your daily like lived experience, that you are used to having these conversations around the color of your skin.
Yeah, well, most of the time, like, the conversations aren't like super serious and like I have to do this and that, but it's more of just like when it's like how people use like memes or like videos to do like a better understanding. It's more of just like when people say certain jokes or make certain statements and stuff like that, you like correct them in like a lighthearted way so they don't take like what you're saying as if, oh my gosh, like I did something wrong. Because most of the time, it's not like I want to make people feel bad, because it's like how you said, it's like guilt. Like I wouldn't even call it guilt, but more like an empathy thing. So like you're starting to feel these feelings and trying to relate to people just because you want to have more of a understanding and show empathy towards them. And that's kind of like how I try to come towards these conversations, not to walk away trying to hurt somebody's feelings and make them feel like I go through all these things that I go through because of them and because of what they go through, because there has to be like accountability on both sides. Because I know that certain things that I go through can be caused by the own Black community itself, and then certain things that I go through aren't caused by white people individually or Hispanic people individually, but it's more of an unconscious situation and stuff like that. So it's not necessarily like me trying to tell people what they're doing wrong in their life or necessarily telling people what I'm doing wrong in my life, but more of just like educate each other. So like I go through this because of things that I go through, and you go through these things because of I go through, and coming to like a mutual agreement that we both have our own struggles and we both go through things, but certain struggles that we go through are based off of who we are and how we look like. And things like that are probably like what we're trying to lead, like in the conversation towards like a mutual agreement.
Yeah. And one of the things you mentioned in there that kind of struck a chord with me was it's kind of each person's responsibility, or we each need the accountability to have these conversations. Mm-hmm. And one of the things since George Floyd's murder that I tried to do was really listen and learn and try to understand more perspectives. And one of the perspectives that I came across was that it was from a Black woman who basically was like, I am tired of white people coming to me to explain what racism looks like or mm-hmm. get my opinion, like do your own research. Where do you feel the intersection on that is? Because that definitely makes, right, I wanted to have this conversation, but like that little comment was just rolling around in here of like, am I being inappropriate coming to Black individuals in my life that I feel like I could have a good conversation with and an open conversation with? Is that like wrong of me? Where do you fall on that in terms of like individual accountability on getting better understandings of these different lived experiences and kind of the social injustices that are going on?
Yeah, well, I'm always open to conversation because I can't tell people that they need to learn something that's going on in my life. and then tell them to go find it out themselves. Because if I'm kind of just telling them, it's like, well, I don't have the time for this, but I want you to have the time for this. It doesn't really make sense in my mind, just because I can't expect people to go out of their ways to learn something if I'm not going to go out of my way to teach them and stuff like that. So it's more of like if you're going to reach out to somebody about the situations, and if you do want to talk to a Black individual, it has to be someone that you're close to. It can't be just like some random person in your 500 friends on Facebook and like you're like, oh, they're Black, so I'm going to reach out to them. You actually have to have like some sort of a relationship between them, and knowing that they'd actually want to have the conversation with you in the beginning is probably like the best way to start it out with. Yeah, it's like just like someone that you're comfortable with having a conversation with.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you recommend to someone who maybe doesn't feel like they have someone they could comfortably reach out to and have a conversation? What can they do?
You can always start on Googling. That's probably like the best way. Like sometimes starting the conversations with people that you don't know could probably be a very anxious environment, and you might not feel comfortable doing that. So probably starting the conversation with, even if you don't have someone in your life that you can reach out to that is a person of color, you can always just start in your own family and stuff like that. And you guys can Google things and then start conversations on that. And then once you are comfortable and think you do have like enough to actually start having conversations with people outside of your life, you can join groups where you could be seen as an ally, or you can start creating relationships with people that aren't necessarily the same group that you wouldn't necessarily be friends with, and you can go out of your way maybe to find a person of color that you could be friends with, not necessarily saying, oh, because they are this, that I should be their friends, but finding someone that you actually do mesh well with, and creating that close relationship to be able to have those types of conversations with people.
Absolutely. And I think college campuses could be great resources for that.
Yeah,
especially when we're all on campus.
Yeah.
As someone like who's associated with the Black Student Union and clubs on campus, what kind of resources, and I know you can really only speak for Chico State, but what are common like resources on campus for someone who might want to either participate or expand their own experiences, or even kind of work towards becoming an ally?
Well, I think the Cross-Cultural Leadership Center, the CCLC, is probably like the best place to start, because it's not only just Black students, but it's basically anybody and everybody from any types of race. And you can make a lot of relationships through that. And then also there's so many clubs on campus. So there's like the BSU, as I've mentioned before. And there's also, what is it called? There's NESB, which is the Black engineers on campus. And then there's Just Us, who's Just Unity Sisters, which is a club that's about amplifying Black women's voices. And just because like inside of the club name is Black doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be Black to be in that club, which a lot of people probably assume. But inside of the Just Us, there are a lot of different races that have joined into the conversations, and same with the Black Student Union, because we try to build bridges between different clubs on campus. So just because you look a certain way doesn't mean you can't be part of the club, which I think a lot of people from both sides, both Black, white, and everything in between, think that you have to stay inside of your own little community.
Yeah, that's nice to hear from someone on the inside, right, so to speak. I know I think I would be intimidated showing up if I were a student. So it's probably really assuring to hear that, like, hey, you're welcome here.
Yeah.
Regardless. I appreciate you sharing that, because I actually, teaching on Chico State campus since 2011, so almost a decade, I think I only knew of about one of those clubs that you mentioned.
Oh, really? Well, the Black Student Union, we started last year. So like it was me and a different founder that had started it, and we were kind of like building it from the ground up. But Just Us has been part of it, I think, for a couple of years, I think. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So kind of keeping things focused on campus and teaching, is there anything that educators like regularly do in their classroom or even in their like structure that maybe there's the term microaggression, which can be overused and misused, but even something that kind of detracts from the experience that you could be getting. And the example that really comes to mind for me is I went to a diversity roundtable probably about 5 years ago, and one of the students, a young Black man, said that he wished all instructors would randomize their groups. And his reason for that was when instructors let students choose their own groups, he said it was always like, I looked around and be like, all right, who are the other Black kids in the room? Because that's who I'm going to be with. And so he wished that instructors would randomize their groups so there wasn't that moment of almost feeling singled out, that all the white kids jump in groups together and then it's like the 3 Black students who are left to just end up in a group. And that's kind of always stuck with me. And you've noticed, you've been in class with me, I've randomized the groups on repeatedly and kind of on a couple times throughout this semester. And so that's definitely impacted my teaching. Is there anything like that that you can speak to?
Like, is something else in the classroom that we could do to help?
Yeah. So that was just one example of kind of the thing I'm talking about. And right, I thought students all wanted to start groups together, and I would have never thought that that was creating an isolating experience for students of colors. So is there anything like that you've come across or you kind of wish instructors wouldn't do or would maybe do differently?
Not that I could have thought of, because I didn't even think about the one that you were saying, but like as soon as you had said it, I immediately like thought about it, because like when I walk in the classroom, I do try to sit next to the one other Black person in the classroom, but like I didn't even think about that until you had brought it up. I guess it was like an unconscious thing.
Yeah, no worries. I just thought I would ask. So just in general, relating to skin color, race, diversity, or not, just as a general student, what is one thing you would want every one of your instructors to start doing in their next class that could make it a better experience?
I like check-ins. Like
check-ins?
Like when teachers do the mid-semester check-ins or like check-ins after big exams, like when they personally hand back exams, I've had teachers tell us whether we're doing good and to keep up the good work, or they'll say little things like, I know you can do better. It kind of gives people like a good push in the right direction to actually keep a positive learning ideas. And you actually kind of want to try harder when you know that your teacher is going to the means to actually tell you that you're doing a good job, or I know personally you can do better because I've seen you in the classroom and all the work that you've done. I think having the positive statements or the things like that kind of help a lot.
Yeah, so a little bit of acknowledgement that you're not just another student ID number in the class, so to speak, that they see you perform.
Exactly.
And have thought about ways you can improve or recognize success. Okay, yeah, I like that. Just in general, what makes a class or we'll circle back to that question that I want to ask. How do you have any ideas of how instructors can do that with the remote learning that's coming up with COVID, right? We're looking at potentially an entire school year completely online, and that's an interaction that's really easy to do just like in passing in the classroom. So how can we maybe facilitate that in an online format?
I guess it could be, I know not all classrooms do participation points or attendance points, But I think that would probably be like a good way to do your participation points, where the student has to set up a certain time or do it by a certain date by the time to check in with the teacher and seeing how they're doing in class and stuff like that. Or maybe even making it a thing where after a test we have discussion boards, and it doesn't have to be necessarily something that all the students have to see, but it could just be a discussion board. I don't know if you have that ability, but a discussion board where you're posting privately and saying how you felt about the test and stuff like that, or even a public one where students themselves can respond back to their other classmates and saying, well, if you need this help or if you need that or you're doing good and stuff like that. Just having kind of keeping the in-person class and remote learning.
Yeah, and that's absolutely something instructors can do, is kind of those either even discussion boards or kind of live messaging type of apps or technologies. So that's a great suggestion. What would you, like you kind of just hinted at it, like students even suggesting certain resources to other students. Mm-hmm. What is one thing you'd recommend to every other student? It could be a purchase, it could be a study skill, it could be just a recommendation.
I really like the tutors on campus just because it's not a one-on-one tutoring, but you're in a group. So like since you're in that group with that tutoring group, you're probably bound to get their numbers and stuff like that, or even just going to office hours. Like I know that's like an easy thing to say, but like I don't think a lot of students go to teachers' office hours just because it's not like a requirement and stuff like that. So they. Do you
think that's the main reason why students don't go into office hours? Is it's not required? Or?
I feel, I guess it could be that, or just because necessarily they don't have the time with their social life and stuff, or that, or because it's like a one-on-one thing and not a lot of students like to be one-on-one with teachers just because it's hard to keep conversations going sometimes.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know, but probably because of like the status differences. It's like a teacher is above a student, but like once you like realize that you're both people, it's a lot easier to have conversations.
One of the things I like to do is, it's silly, but invite a student in while I'm eating lunch. It's pretty humanizing to be like chomping a salad, like having a conversation, right? There's some vulnerability of like what's in my teeth and like, I don't know, just a way to seem a bit more human, right?
I've eaten lunch with a teacher once during their office hours before.
Yeah. Some of my best conversations I've had with students were over lunch. I'm like, all right, I've got 30 minutes between my next classes. And
because I didn't have anything to do on campus. So I was like, might as well spend our office hours. She invited us.
Yeah. That's fantastic. What can instructors do to help facilitate those recommendations, right? Going to or getting connected with tutoring centers and tutoring groups and then encouraging office hours. Is there anything you think educators can do to facilitate students doing those?
I've had teachers that give us opportunities like extra credit points to go into tutors, but then after a certain point, I wasn't even going for tutors because of the extra credit, but just because I've noticed that I was doing better on my tests just in general. So I wasn't even going for the extra boosts in the class. It was more so I can have a good grade standing by the end of the semester that I wouldn't need those extra credit points.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great little incentive. I personally, you might laugh at my idea on this, knowing my grading structure, but I kind of believe like the extra credit's a cop-out, like motivating students to do it. And you're like, Becky, you give us a ton of tokens, which aren't extra credit, but they're similar. What other ways beyond, because there are a lot of instructors out there who have very strong feelings about extra credit and whether it overinflates grades or is appropriate, or
I even noticed that the extra credit doesn't even do anything for our grades. It's just like nice to see that one extra point in like the thousands of points you already have.
Yeah, it's a small thing, right? Especially if you don't go overboard, right? It's just the kind of a feel-good thing, but some people, don't agree with that. So what would you say to them? What's another way to facilitate students getting connected with the tutoring center without the extra credit?
There's teachers that it's not even like the actual tutoring, but they have student proctors, I think. I don't know what they're called, but like I've had proctors in my class where they have sessions between different times of the day, whether it's like during the morning or during the evening, where they're teaching, and it's a person that had gone through the class like the semester before. And because they have a relationship with the teacher, you're more likely to know what's gonna be on the exam because they have a general idea, or just because they're literally like 1 year older than you, or not even 1 year older, because they could be the same age as you, and it's more of like a study session more than a tutoring session because you're working in groups. I think that's a nice way of doing it as well. Also, I like when teachers kind of make you get numbers from students in the classroom automatically in the first day of school, because I end up using those numbers anyways, just in case that I forgot something or if I missed class that day. I think that's a good way of trying to get communication going.
I like that because there's probably a little bit of awkwardness like asking each other for your phone numbers, but
Right.
if your teachers like get each other's numbers, it's a requirement.
Yeah.
Some of that friction is reduced, so to speak, and it's a little easier to make that connection. What do you think teachers can do with the online COVID type stuff to facilitate more of that connection between students?
Well, I guess it's like I've been taking summer classes right now, and I've noticed a lot of the students have been using the messaging part of, well, I'm doing it through a community campus, so we're doing Canvas instead of Blackboard, but I've noticed a lot of students are reaching out to each other through the messaging board because it's an online class, and since we don't want to ask certain questions to the teacher because she probably already stated it and stuff like that, a lot of people are reaching out to their fellow students, which I think is nice. I guess having group discussions or like creating groups within classes that I've seen where you can have certain people in different groups and stuff like that, I think that's a good way to keep communication going as well.
Yeah, you actually touch on a couple good things there. There's actually a teaching concept called tutoring, which is kind of a weird way to do it, or I think they call it tutorials. But it's basically dividing a bigger class into smaller groups that meet regularly all throughout the semester, and that can definitely help foster techniques and connection. There's actually these studies that have come out saying the ideal online class size. Take a guess.
Is it like 5?
Yeah, it's like 7.
Oh, wow.
So like that's the ideal class size. And for example, in our class, we had 45. But during our open Zoom hours, we had like 7 to 10 regulars, and we felt pretty connected, right?
Yeah,
so that might be
Oh, go ahead, sorry. Oh, I even had like teachers I've seen on Zoom, you can make breakout groups.
Yeah.
That's a really cool way of doing it too.
Yeah, so the breakout rooms, they're super useful, but they're also limited in terms of they create them randomly. So if you're okay with a group being randomized, great. But if you're trying to keep like the same 5 students together, it takes a bit more work, and students have to have like their Zoom account signed in and using that email. And so there's some hiccups, but it's possible. And it's good feedback that breakout rooms are awesome, and it could help connect you with people that you might not otherwise know. So we've been talking for a little while now, and I want to respect your time. And before I get into some of the kind of like sillier questions or just kind of like wrap up type things, is there anything else you want to really touch on or want to speak on or speak about?
I guess like a big thing that I've been seeing on social media with like, and it's more of like not even an actual post, but I find myself reading the comments and I'll go like 30 comments deep just seeing people argue. And it's like a big thing where people think support has to be a financial fund, or it has to be you actually starting, or it has to be you posting certain things, because if you don't post and you're silent, it means that you're against it. But I necessarily don't see silence as you being against it. It's more you're not ready to have the conversation. And I think you shouldn't necessarily have to push people to have a conversation that they're not necessarily ready or educated enough to have, because you don't want to have an unplanned conversation with somebody and then feelings end up getting hurt. So like,
yeah, it sounds like it could do more damage than
good in
those cases.
Because like not, it's like the intent might have been good, but your impact on somebody's silence and calling them out for it necessarily isn't going to start them to have the conversation, but probably going to cause them not even to want to have the conversation in the beginning, because you're calling them out about their silence. And as soon as they speak up, you're going to be like, well, you only said something because you've been silent all this time. It's like, what good does that do anybody at all?
Yeah, I can speak to that in terms of like, okay, what should I say? What should I do? Right? Mm-hmm. This is clearly something that we as a collective group need to act on, but like, what is one more meme gonna do on the timeline? And so me personally, I try to be very like intentional about what I post and share. Mm-hmm. And then even with responding, right, you kind of have to choose your battles. And there are definitely posts that are meant to just like inflame.
Like trigger somebody.
Like what?
Like the post is really only meant to trigger the person's response.
Right. They're not trying to facilitate good conversations that actually lead to positive change or learning experiences, things like that. They're really just trying to start something. Even like, I guess, how would you, or what would you say about if someone's working to be an ally, right? I mean, even me. And I see someone or some person say something, and I know that person's closed off. I know that there's nothing I can say to open that door or that conversation, or obviously these people need to be addressed, right? And they need to say like, this isn't okay. What should someone like me do in that scenario?
Well, I've noticed a lot on social media that as soon as somebody says something stupid, or if you notice that someone's closed off, the first response that people have is, well, you're a racist. And calling somebody a racist gets you nowhere, just because you're attacking them, and because you're attacking them, they're going to do the same towards you again. So I think conversations kind of have to be happened without name calling, or without the I statements, or without the you statements, I mean. I think when you're having conversations, you should start with, well, I feel like, instead of saying, well, you're wrong because, or stuff like that. I think by not addressing the person, by saying what they're doing wrong or what they said was incorrect, it's probably should be like a more like, you should soften what you're saying sometimes. And that's probably not like the best response for everybody, because if you say certain things with a soft mind, people might think that you're like tiptoeing around the situation. But sometimes you kind of have to tiptoe around people to even get them open to having the conversation in the first place.
Yeah, you kind of have to ease in, especially if they're particularly closed off. It makes sense. Yeah, it's always a hard thing. Like I'm a big proponent of choosing your battles. Yeah. I'm a very non-confrontational person, so that might be part of it. But I like to choose my battles. I like to be educated on it. That's helpful to know, like how to start little conversations like that, and maybe not make it a battle. It's not a
and even knowing like when to stop the conversation is a good thing too. Like when you know it's not getting anywhere, you should just be like, well, end it respectfully. So be like, well, have a nice day. It seems like we're not getting like, don't do it in a disrespectful manner. Yeah,
that's great advice. That's great advice. Thank you for speaking on all of that. As we're wrapping up here, what is one of the best class experiences you've ever had? Just in general, like it could be a funny moment, it could be a whole structure, but just what's one of the best things that's ever happened in a class?
I feel like the most like memorable teacher I've ever had was probably my English teacher from high school. And it's like a long time ago, and I still visit him to this day. And I think it's just because of his personality. So like, you would be in the classroom, and all of a sudden he would just scream, like randomly, like no reason at all. He would just start screaming, and like it would get your attention, but like you're like, why are you screaming? Or like when the classroom would start, he would close the door, and if your seat was next to the classroom, or he would pick a random person always, and he'd stand next to you and like scream good morning, and I was like, okay, like we get it, you have it. Yeah. But he's like an amazing person. Like I still go to my high school and visit him to this day, and like we'll still have conversations, and it's really nice just to catch up with him.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's wonderful. It's again bringing that personality into the classroom and not just being a teacher robot. Yeah, I love that. So Adrienne, how close are you to being done? What do you want to do once you've got your degree?
So at first I was going to be done in the fall. So like this is supposed to be my last semester, but I found a minor that I'm really interested in. So I'm going to be graduating this coming spring. And my goal is to be like occupational therapist, but it seems like there's a lot of hoops and stuff to get through before I can actually get there. So I thought about taking a year off to get like my hours in and actually figuring out if it's something that I'm interested in, or if I'm just like brought in by the idea, if it's going to be something I actually want to do with the rest of my life. So hopefully doing that.
I'm a big advocate for getting a little bit of experience with what you're wanting to do. I know that's made a difference in my own career trajectory. I got my hands pretty dirty on certain topics of research and stuff and being like, nope.
Right.
So I think that's a great pursuit. What's your minor that you picked up?
Adapted physical activity.
Okay. That's fantastic.
And I really want to work with kids because like I've learned, because I've been like a nanny for like the past like 6 years and stuff like that. So I've learned that I like working with kids. And I kind of want to work with children on the autistic spectrum and stuff like that. So hopefully, like, fingers crossed, it works out.
Yeah, I think that's a really awesome career path. And as a parent of a kid with special needs, we have been working with Bowden and a number of his therapists. Like, we have a lot of weekly standing meetings. But those occupational physical therapists, speech therapists, feeding specialists, early intervention specialists, they really make all the difference, right? It's huge. So that's a really great career path. And you get to work with cute kids, or at least my kids are cute. So. That's awesome, Adrienne. Well, thank you so much for having this conversation with me and being the first guest on the Epic Higher Ed podcast. I really appreciate that you came on here with an open mind and willing to speak vulnerably and a forgiving attitude for me and my own flubs and what did I call it? It was the conscious ignorance. So thank you.
No, thank you for having me. I hope I did okay. I know I'm like a really fast talker, but I tried to slow it down.
You did wonderful. So thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and sign us off.